The cry was too soft to be an animal's, too human, too close to death. Elias Gray froze mid-step, boot-crunching dry pine needles beneath him. The wind in the Bitterroot Mountains usually whispered like an old ghost, but this was different. This was a baby's cry, thin, cracked, desperate. It barely made it past the brittle air. His rifle slid from his shoulder in a practiced motion, but it wasn't a threat he was hunting. It was instinct. Survival. The kind that didn't question before it moved. His eyes scanned the tall grass along the creek bed. The late summer sun beat down, making the rocks shimmer like coals. Bitter Creek, now more stone than water, wound past his cabin like a dying snake. Everything in these parts had been drying up since spring, but not like this. Then he saw it. A wooden crate half sunken in the brush near the dry stream bed. No markings. Not a sound now. He took a step closer, then another. The crate shifted, God Almighty. Elias dropped to one knee, tossed the rifle to the ground, and rushed forward. As he reached it, a small fist, red and raw, punched weakly through a crack between the slats. His hands shook as he ripped at the wood. Nails tore skin. Splinters embedded in his palms. He didn't feel any of it. The lid gave way with a loud snap. Inside, lying in a bundle of torn canvas and soaked rags, was a baby girl. No older than 9 months, her skin blistered from the sun, lips split and dry. Her chest rose in shallow, frantic breaths. And then she looked at him, eyes barely open, and whispered something no child should ever whisper to a stranger. "Mama." The sound made Elias flinch like he'd been shot. For a terrible second, he couldn't breathe. 8 years ago, he'd heard another voice call for him in a burning cabin. His son Thomas trapped inside their home as fire chewed through timber and memory. That voice had torn him in half, and now this one, the faint, broken echo of a dying child, dragged him all the way back. "I got you, little one," he whispered. His voice broke against the wind. "I got you now." He pulled her from the crate. She weighed almost nothing. Her tiny fingers gripped his shirt with a strength she shouldn't have had. She was burning up, skin hot to the touch. She was slipping fast, dehydration, sunstroke, maybe worse. Elias knew he had no more than an hour. He mounted Bear, his mule, without bothering to saddle up, cradling the baby in one arm. The mule snorted at the urgency in his touch. "Run, old man. Run like hell." The mountain trail blurred under hooves and heat. Wind tore at his hat. Dust filled his mouth. Elias rode through bramble and branch like a man possessed. Every few seconds he checked her breathing, her grip. Still alive. Still fighting. He hadn't spoken God's name in years, not since the fire that took his family. But now he said it again and again. "Please, please, not this one." Gray Pine's main road shimmered with heat waves as he galloped down it, scattering chickens and shouting old men. Windows flew open. A dog barked once and fell silent. No one dared stop Elias Gray when he rode like this. He skidded to a halt in front of the town clinic. Before the mule even stopped kicking up dust, Elias jumped off and kicked the door in. "Doc!" he roared. "Doc Cormack." Inside the clinic was dark and cool. The old man rose from his chair like he'd been expecting war. "What the hell, baby? Found her by Bitter Creek. Crate. She's burning up. She's dying. Lay her down." Doc Cormack snapped into action, yanking the oilcloth off the exam table. Now Elias did as told, his breath ragged. His hands hovered unsure. He didn't know where to touch, what to do. The doctor moved fast, checking the girl's pupils, pulse, breath. "She's close. Damn close. Heat stroke, severe dehydration. You said you found her in a crate." Elias nodded, jaw tight. Someone meant for her to die. Cormac looked up, his hands never stopping, but she didn't. Not yet. Elias leaned against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, head between his knees, chest heaving. He hadn't felt this helpless since the night he held his son's charred toy in shaking hands. "Mama," the baby whimpered again. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what she needed. She just wanted someone. Anyone. The clinic door creaked open. "I heard shouting. What happened?" a voice said, soft, female. Maggie Two Rivers stepped in, skirts gathered in her hands, a flour smudge still on her cheek from morning bread. She saw the child on the table and stopped cold. Her lips parted. Her eyes filled. "Maggie, the doctor said I need help." She didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was pale, but her fingers were steady. "What can I do?" Cool cloths. Drip water into her mouth, little at a time. No milk, and keep her awake. Maggie's hands moved as if by memory, but her eyes never left the girl. "I had a daughter once," she whispered, so quiet only Elias heard. 6 months old. Fever took her in a day. The baby whimpered again. Maggie's lip trembled, but she held firm. "I never held another baby since." The child squirmed weakly. Maggie touched her forehead. The baby stilled, then reached out with her fingers and latched onto Maggie's hand. Elias saw it then, what the baby had done to him out at the creek. Now she was doing the same to this woman. Opening something long shut. "She's strong," Maggie said, her voice hushed. "And she's trying to stay." They worked in silence. Time bent around them. Cool water, careful hands, soft prayers. The sun dipped behind the ridge. Then finally the baby opened her eyes and gave the smallest smile. A breath, a blink, a heartbeat longer than the one before it. Doc Cormac stepped back and sighed. "She's gonna make it." Elias pressed his hand to his face. His palms still bled from the crate. He didn't care. He looked at Maggie, who cradled the baby against her shoulder now, like she'd done it all her life. The girl was wrapped in a clean blanket. Safe. For now. "What's her name?" Maggie asked. Elias shook his head. "Don't know. She didn't have one on her. Just the word she said." "Mama," Maggie whispered. She looked down at the baby. "That's not enough." Doc Cormac cleared his throat. "You two best come up with something. Can't just call her baby forever." Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere out there, someone had thrown this child away. Someone would want to make sure she stayed gone. And someone else had just decided that wouldn't happen. Elias turned to the door, sensing eyes already watching from the hills. His hand went to the knife on his belt. Maggie stepped beside him, still holding Lily May. "Whoever put her in that crate," Elias said quietly, "better pray they never come back to look for her. Because if they did, they'd find out just how dangerous a man could be when he had nothing left to lose." I swore I'd never hold another baby again. But when she reached for me, I forgot how to breathe. Maggie sat in the rocking chair beside the clinic window, the scent of wood smoke and carbolic still clinging to the air. Outside, the afternoon sun was sinking behind the ridge, bleeding red into the pines. The baby Lily May, they were calling her now, rested against her chest. Her tiny fists curled in sleep, her breath warm and steady. Every few moments, her lips twitched, as if dreaming of something softer than the world she'd been thrown into. Elias stood nearby, arms folded, leaning against the wall like a shadow with weight. His sleeves were rolled up, his hands still bandaged from the splinters he'd torn through earlier. He hadn't said much since the baby's fever broke, just watched, quiet, wary, like he was waiting for something to go wrong. Maggie hadn't stopped watching the girl either. "She's got a strong grip," she murmured. Elias grunted softly. Held onto my shirt the whole ride in. She held onto my finger when she was half gone, Maggie said. That's not just instinct. That's will. Doc Cormac was dozing at his desk, a hand over his eyes, his chair creaking every now and then as he shifted. The clinic had grown still, but the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was tense like the pause before a storm. Every soul in that room knew they were only safe for now. She needs milk, Maggie said after a long silence. Real milk, and something gentle for her burns. There's a woman out past the ridge, Elias replied. Keeps goats. I can ride there in the morning. I'll make a salve tonight. Maggie shifted the baby slightly, adjusting the blanket. We used it back on the farm. Calendula spruce gum bear fat if you've got it. I've got it. Elias's eyes flicked to her. You were raised Salish half, she said without looking at him. Other half French. Métis by blood, orphan by circumstance. You lost your little girl? The words weren't a question. Maggie nodded slowly, her throat tightening. She had her father's eyes, gray like storm clouds. Just woke up hot one morning and didn't wake up again the next. She paused, her voice fragile. I held her like this, right here, all through that night, praying it would bring her back. Elias shifted his stance but said nothing. I told myself I'd never hold another, Maggie whispered. But when this one reached for me, I forgot how to breathe. Lily May stirred against her, whimpering softly. Maggie adjusted the blanket again, pressing a kiss to the child's hot forehead. Elias crossed the room and knelt beside the chair. His hands hovered awkwardly, as if unsure whether to help or stay clear. She reminds me of my boy, he said after a moment. He had a cry like that just before he walked. High and stubborn. Maggie glanced at him, but he was staring at the baby. His name was Thomas. What happened? Elias inhaled through his nose, slow and jagged. Winter, stovepipe cracked. Fire caught while I was outside cutting wood. Sarah, my wife. She must have tried to get him out. His voice was even but hollow. By the time I got inside, the roof was gone. They were gone. Maggie's hand found his. Their fingers touched just briefly, but it was enough. I used to think, she said softly, that we were being punished. Elias didn't answer, but his eyes met hers. There was something unspoken there, an ache she recognized too well. We give her a name, Maggie said after a while. Then we give her a place. She already has one. I mean something permanent. Elias stood again. Don't get used to her. Whoever left her in that crate might come looking once they hear she's still alive. Or they'll try to make sure she's not, Maggie replied. Neither one said it, but they both knew who had the kind of power to erase a child and leave no footprints. Judge Silas Lark. The silence thickened as dusk bled into evening. Lamps were lit. The wind shifted again. Somewhere outside, a raven called out a low, croaking caw that echoed like a warning across the empty street. Maggie laid the baby down in a makeshift cradle Doc Cormac had set up from a supply box and old linens. Lily May fussed briefly, then settled. I'll stay the night, Maggie said. Elias looked at her. I'm not leaving her, she added. Not until I know she's safe. Doc Cormac stirred behind them. You'd best get some sleep then. She'll be up again in a few hours, hungry. I'll sleep when she's strong enough to cry like she means it. Cormac chuckled dryly. You sound like you've done this before. I have, Maggie said. Elias moved to the door, his hand resting on the knob. I'll sleep outside the clinic, he said. Someone watches the road at night. I can feel it. You think they know already? Maggie asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She stepped to the window after he left. The street was empty, but she knew he was right. Word traveled quick in Grapevine, and if someone had paid to dispose of Lily May, they'd be watching to see if she rose from the grave they tried to give her. Maggie closed the shutters, latched the window, and tucked the blanket tighter around the baby. The storm wasn't here yet, but it was coming, and it would come hard. She turned to Doc Cormack. "Is there anyone in this town we can trust?" The old man exhaled, slow and tired. "Not many," he said, "but maybe just enough." The door creaked open behind them. Not Elias. Someone smaller. Ruthie Sparrow. The judge's laundress stood in the shadows, eyes red, hands twisting in front of her apron. Maggie turned fully to face her. I need to speak to you," Ruthie whispered. Maggie glanced at the baby, then back at the woman in the doorway. "It's about Lily May," Ruthie said. "And Judge Lark." Maggie's heart dropped, already bracing. Someone paid to get rid of that baby. Ruthie said, her voice trembling. "And if you keep her, you'll all be next." Maggie's hand went to her hip where her old revolver still hung under her apron ties. "Then let's talk," she said, "because I think we're done hiding." The log snapped sharply in the hearth, sending a flurry of sparks dancing into the cold air of the cabin. Boone's eyes stayed fixed on the girl curled up in his old bed, her tiny chest rising in shallow, careful breaths. She hadn't spoken since the fever broke. Not a word. Only opened her eyes once to scan the cabin, as if unsure she was still on Earth. He'd wiped the grime from her face, coaxed warm broth into her cracked lips, even sang a crooked lullaby he hadn't remembered knowing. But still nothing. "You survived hell," he muttered almost to himself. "But it's the silence that's killing you now, ain't it?" He ran a hand down his face, streaked with soot and frustration. "You gotta speak, baby girl. I can't help what I don't understand." The child shifted, and for a heartbeat he hoped, but she only pulled the patchwork quilt tighter, eyes shut tight as if against the world. Sometimes the quiet isn't peace, it's the scream you swallowed whole. He turned at the creak of the door. Josie came in, snow clinging to her boots and lashes. She eat anything she asked, glancing at the untouched bowl on the table. Boone shook his head. "Still not a word. Still won't tell me her name." Josie's face hardened. No kid ends up in a crate in the woods unless the ones who should love her did something evil first. That kind of hurt, it don't come out easy. She's got bruises across her ribs and burns on the soles of her feet. Josie's jaw clenched. Lord. They both stood in silence. Boone watched as Josie gently brushed back the child's hair, her fingers trembling just slightly. "We need to take her to Doc Marin," Josie whispered. "He's quiet with kids, gentle. She can't make that ride. Not in this cold. We'll wrap her tight. It's riskier to wait. Infections don't care if it's snowing." Boone looked out the window. The wind whipped sideways, now howling like a thing half alive. "I know a shortcut down to Elk Hollow. Fewer cliffs. Might buy us the hours." Josie's eyes held him. "You'll be carrying her," he nodded. "Then I'm going with you." They bundled the girl in every blanket they had, swaddling her like she was made of breath and thread. Boone tucked her into his chest under his coat. Her head nestled against him, but she didn't cling, didn't shiver, didn't resist, just nothing. As they stepped into the storm, Josie grabbed Boone's sleeve. "She deserves to know we ain't like the ones who broke her." Boone looked down at the child. "She'll know, even if we gotta prove it one breath at a time." The trail was a jagged line carved by wind and old hoofprints. Boone pressed forward, his boots breaking through crusted snow as Josie kept pace beside him, rifle slung just in case of wolves. He could feel the heat rolling off the girl fever again. He shifted her higher, his heart hammering. "She's burnin' up," he said, wind tearing the words from his throat. "We're almost to the bend." "Then it's all downhill," Josie shouted over the gale. But as they rounded the narrow pass above the gorge, Boone's boot hit ice. He staggered, clutched the child tight, and dropped to one knee just short of the cliff's edge. "Damn," Josie grabbed his arm, eyes wide. Boone's breath came in gasps. "I ain't losing her. Not now." "She okay?" Boone looked down. The girl's eyes were open wide and unblinking, but tears pooled at the corners, sliding silently into the scarf wrapped beneath her chin. He shifted her fingers, brushing her cheek. "You hang on, you hear me? We're almost there. You don't give up now." Her lips moved. Boone froze. "What was that?" She tried again. This time it came barely a whisper, hoarse and broken. "Honey?" Boone's throat tightened. "That your name?" The girl blinked slowly, then almost imperceptibly nodded. Josie had tears in her eyes. "Junie," she said softly. "That's a beautiful name, honey." Boone stood lifting her again. "All right, Junie. You hang in there. We're getting you safe." The trail dipped sharply then, and they pushed forward, the wind clawing at their coats, the snow slicing their skin. Josie broke ahead to clear the path, her lantern bobbing through the storm. An hour later, the lights of Elk Hollow flickered through the pines like the promise of mercy. Boone pounded on Doc Marin's door with his boot. The old man opened, eyes narrowing under bushy brows. "She's burning up," Boone said, voice cracking. "Found her near dead in a crate." The doctor didn't ask questions. He led them straight in. They peeled the wet blankets off and laid Junie on the cot. Doc Marin pressed a hand to her brow, then her chest, then listened to her back. He lifted her shirt, revealing the bruises along her ribs. His face darkened. "She needs fluids." "IV. I'll do what I can." Boone stood there, fists clenched. She said her name. Josie glanced at him. Boone nodded. "Junie." Doc Marin gave him a rare look of approval. "That's something, means she's fighting. I ain't letting her fight alone." As the IV dripped into her arm and the fire grew high again in the hearth, Junie drifted in and out of sleep. Boone stayed close, never letting go of her hand. Josie brewed coffee, pacing by the window rifle, never far. Around dawn, Junie stirred again, her lips parted. "Where?" Mama Boone leaned close. "She ain't here, sweetheart. But we are." She looked up at him, eyes clouded with pain. "She put me there. In the box." Boone's heart shattered clean in two. Josie knelt beside her. "That wasn't your fault, baby," she said. "Nobody wanted me." Boone brushed her hair gently, voice thick. Then she lied. Junie turned her face into his coat, silent tears soaking the wool. And for the first time, Boone saw it, the flicker of trust, fragile, as winter light blooming in her broken little body. Josie placed a hand on his back. "You ready to find out who did this?" Boone nodded once. "If they left her in that crate, they ain't done with their cruelty. We need to find 'em before they do it again." The girl whispered again, barely audible. "Uncle, Jesse." Boone's eyes narrowed. "She's got more to say, and I'm listening." Outside, the wind died down, but inside that room a storm had just begun. Under the bruised sky of a waning dusk, the cabin stood half silent, half breathing with worry. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, but inside tension clung to the walls like frost. Jonah sat at the edge of the cot, where Eliza now slept, her chest rising and falling in rhythm, though her brow still tightened at intervals. She'd cried herself to sleep. Again. "She said she ain't gonna talk to me no more." Maddie whispered from behind him, her small voice barely above the hush of the wind rattling the window pane. Jonah turned to look at her. Maddie stood wrapped in one of Eliza's old quilts, face flushed from heat and hurt. Her hazel eyes, so like her sister's, flicked to her boots, then back to Eliza. "She didn't mean it like that," he said gently. "She's scared. You both are." "I didn't do nothing wrong," Maddie muttered, chewing the edge of her thumbnail. "I was just trying to make her laugh." "You didn't do anything wrong," Maddie Jonah said, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're just trying to keep her from sinking. That's a mighty brave thing." She looked up, surprised by the word brave, and her lip trembled. "But what if she's mad forever?" Jonah hesitated. He didn't know how to explain grief to a child, how it wound around the ribs and squeezed till breathing hurt. He knew Eliza wasn't just mourning their mama, she was mourning safety, mourning peace. He understood, because once he'd mourned those same things too. "She ain't mad at you," he said finally. "She's mad at the world, at what happened, and maybe even mad at herself for not being able to stop it." Maddie leaned into him just a little. "I wish Mama could have seen this cabin. It smells like biscuits and pine." Jonah's throat closed up at that. She'd have liked that. Behind them, the floor creaked, Eliza's stirred eyes fluttering open with a confused softness that hardened the moment she realized where she was. She sat up fast. "Where's Maddie?" she croaked. "Right here," Maddie said, hurrying to the bed. "I didn't go far. I just needed air." Eliza's hands trembled as she pulled her sister into her arms. "Don't ever disappear on me again, Maddie May. I can't lose you too." "I won't," the little girl promised, her voice muffled in Eliza's collarbone. "I ain't gonna let that happen to either of you," Jonah said quietly. "Not while I still breathe." Eliza looked at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but something in them had shifted, like she was beginning to see not just a rescuer, but a place to land. That night, Jonah stayed in the main room, fire crackling low as the girls slept. He didn't doze. Instead, he watched shadows move and let memories claw at the edges of his thoughts. He remembered nights like this when he was a boy, hiding his baby brother under the floorboards, when drunks came to collect debts Pa never paid. And he remembered the morning he found the door hanging open, and the cot empty. He hadn't been able to save anyone back then, but he could now. The next morning broke cold and bright. The wind had shifted, carrying the bite of snow, and the horses were restless. Jonah was up before the sun, chopping wood with rhythmic force. When Eliza came out wrapped in her shawl, her eyes scanned the sky first, then landed on him. "You don't have to do all this," she said, her voice still rough but steadier. He wiped the sweat from his brow and paused. "Don't have to." "But I want to." Eliza looked away. "Folks usually want something." "I already got what I wanted," he said. "You're safe." She met his eyes again and held them this time. "I ain't used to people doing kind things just because," she admitted. "Last man Mama trusted sold her silver brooch for whiskey." Jonah leaned the axe against the stump. "I don't drink, and I sure as hell don't steal from women." Eliza folded her arms. "Why'd you take us in?" He hesitated, then offered the truth. "Because once someone found me when I was just a half-starved kid with no voice left to ask for help. And they didn't ask me for nothing in return. That kindness saved me. I've been looking to return it ever since." Eliza blinked fast. "Well, maybe we'll try to believe you. That's all I ask," he said with a nod. By mid-morning, Maddie was helping Annie sweep the porch while Jonah hitched the wagon. "We're heading into town," he told Eliza. "Supplies are getting low, and there's a parcel at the post for me. Thought you and Maddie might want to ride along." She frowned. "What if someone recognizes us?" "Let 'em try," Jonah said, checking the harness. "Ain't no law in these parts that lets a man harm a child. And besides, I got friends. Eliza glanced toward the barn, then at her sister. Maddie's eyes sparkled with the hope of something normal. She nodded. All right. But if I say we run, we run. Jonah gave a half smile. Fair enough. As they rolled into the outskirts of Pine Hollow, Eliza's hand tightened around Maddie's. It wasn't a large town, but every voice and footstep set her nerves humming. The general store smelled of leather and molasses, and Jonah greeted the owner, Mr. Alden, like an old friend. Alden eyed Eliza curiously, but said nothing. You're a quiet one, he said to Maddie as he handed her a peppermint stick from behind the counter. I don't talk much to strangers, Maddie said plainly. He chuckled. Smart girl. Jonah gathered supplies while Eliza thumbed through bolts of cloth. When Maddie wandered over to the corner where some toys were set, a sharp voice cut through the shop. Well, I'll be damned. That you, Eliza Barnett? Eliza froze. The voice belonged to Amos Drury, a rancher's son, known for his loose tongue and even looser fists. Jonah looked up sharply as Amos sauntered closer, eyes narrowed. Didn't expect to see you back around these parts. Word was y'all disappeared after your ma died, and here you are smiling in my store like nothing ever happened. I ain't smiling, Eliza said coldly. Amos scoffed. And who's the man? You shack up with the first one to toss a coin. Before Eliza could move, Jonah stepped between them, calm but firm. You're gonna take that tongue of yours and walk right out of this store. Now. Amos sized him up, lips curling. You got no idea who you're dealing with. Jonah's voice dropped. Neither do you. There was something in his eyes, something ancient and dangerous that made Amos flinch. He turned with a mutter and pushed out the door. Maddie clung to Eliza's skirt. Was that man gonna hurt us? Not while Jonah's around? Eliza whispered, her voice shaken. Jonah handed the storekeeper a few bills and didn't speak until they were outside. He won't bother you again. But he recognized me, Eliza said. What if he tells I'll deal with it, Jonah said. You're not going anywhere. The ride back was silent but thick with thought. Eliza held Maddie tighter. The mountain wind had turned colder, and the clouds overhead gathered in warning. As Jonah steered the wagon toward the pass, his voice was low, steady. You're not running anymore. This mountain, it stands for you now. The wind howled outside the cabin like a pack of wolves mourning something long lost. Harlan sat stiff in his rocking chair, boots planted firmly on the pine floor, hands clenched around a half-full mug of coffee gone cold. Fire crackled weakly in the hearth, casting a tired orange glow over the walls, but it did little to thaw the tension hanging between him and the child who sat across from him. Delia hadn't said a word since breakfast. She sat cross-legged on the rug, holding the small wooden horse he'd carved for her yesterday, her fingers working at the grain like she was trying to unlock something hidden beneath the surface. Her eyes didn't leave the toy. Not once. You're awful quiet today, Harlan said, trying to keep his tone gentle. Delia didn't look up. You're gonna take me back. No, I'm not. You say that, she whispered, barely audible. But that's what people do. They give me back. I ain't people, he said firmly. Her chin lifted then, and he caught it, just a flicker of something in her eyes that wasn't fear. It was disbelief, maybe even the smallest crack of hope. But it vanished just as fast. I heard the men talkin' when we stopped in Deer's Gap, she said. They said you don't take in no one. He leaned forward. That was true for a long time. Wasn't true the day I found you. The wind banged against the shutters like a fist. She flinched. Harlan swallowed the ache that rose in his throat. She'd been with him nearly a week now, and still every loud sound made her shrink into herself like a scolded dog. No child should know that kind of terror. Delia stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peer out. "Are they still looking for me?" she asked. "I reckon not. You were left in a crate. That says plenty about how hard they'd look." She didn't answer. He hated the truth in his own words. "I saw the flyer," she muttered finally. "There's another girl missing. Her name's Ellie. She's 6. His brows furrowed. "Where'd you see a flyer when you stopped to buy more grain?" "I saw it tacked to the store wall." Her eyes looked scared, like mine used to. "Delia, I want to help her. You don't even know if she's still alive." Delia turned to him with steel in her voice, the kind that didn't match her small frame. "You didn't know I was alive either." The room went still. The fire popped. "I don't want nobody else in no crate," she said. He stood slowly, walking to the shelf to grab the worn map of the surrounding counties. "Show me where you saw it," he said. Her hand trembled as she pointed. "You understand this ain't a rescue mission like in them dime novels," he warned. "I know." He watched her for a moment, that unshakable look on her face. She wasn't a child asking for a favor. She was a soul who'd been through fire asking another soul who survived it to help carry the bucket. "You got grit," he said finally. "You do too," she replied. By evening they were packed. Harlan had saddled Myrtle, his reliable mule, and harnessed the small wagon. He gave Delia the task of filling canteens and gathering jerky, which she did with a methodical precision that unsettled him. She was far too young to move like that. Supper was sparse. Neither had much appetite. The silence stretched thin until Delia broke it. "You ever lose someone?" she asked, voice low. Harlan didn't answer right away. His jaw clenched. "I lost a brother," he said finally. "Long time ago. Fell through the ice in early spring. I was supposed to be watching him." Delia looked down. "I lost someone too. A woman who sang. She was nice to me sometimes. She said we'd run away, but she never came back." "I'm sorry," he said. "You think they remember us?" "The ones who are gone, I think they do," he said. "And I think sometimes they send folks to find us when we're too lost to cry out." Her eyes flicked toward him. "Like you, like me." The storm outside had calmed to a whisper by the time Harlan banked the fire and turned in. Delia curled under the old quilt he'd given her, the wooden horse resting on her chest. He watched her eyelids flutter shut. She was different now. Still scared. Still guarded. But there was a spark again. And maybe, just maybe, she had found a reason to believe the world wasn't all bad. In the morning, they'd head toward Morrow Creek, where that flyer came from. Harlan didn't know what they'd find, but he'd learned long ago that standing still never saved anyone. He sat back down in his rocking chair, reached for the knife and scrap of wood, and began carving again another tiny horse just in case. Outside, the stars began to bloom in the sky, silent witnesses to a promise neither of them spoke aloud. "You don't even know if she's still alive." "You didn't know I was either." They left before sunrise with a stillness in the air that made every creak of the wagon wheels sound like a shout. Delia sat beside Harlan, bundled in one of his old flannel shirts over her coat, her boots swinging above the floorboards. The silence between them wasn't cold, it was made of thought. Questions they hadn't asked yet. Fears neither dared voice. The road was little more than a memory, a narrow track along the rim of the valley, dusted with last night's snow. Harlan kept his eyes forward, but he noticed how Delia's gaze moved constantly, searching the woods, the hills, the empty distance for signs of Ellie, the girl from the flyer. "You think she's scared?" Delia asked. "Likely. She's younger than me." He nodded. "All the more reason for us to find her." Delia leaned her head against the sideboard. "What if we're too late?" Harlan didn't answer. He didn't want to lie, and he wasn't about to scare her further. But in truth, he'd been thinking the same thing. By mid-morning, they'd reached a fork near Deadmare Gulch, where the trail split between a creek bed and a canyon pass. Harlan pulled on Myrtle's reins. "We'll stop here," he said, pointing to the old lean-to shack still standing from when fur trappers had used the area. While Harlan unpacked supplies, Delia wandered, picking up twigs and listening to the wind skitter leaves across the icy ground. That's when she found the scrap. It was stuck beneath a rock, half frozen. She yanked it loose, a faded corner of the missing child's flyer. Her stomach flipped. "Harlan," he rushed to her side as she held it up. "Why would it be out here?" He took it from her eyes, narrowing. "Someone tried to burn it." "You think that means she's near or someone didn't want her found?" Delia's mouth went dry. They searched the clearing. Behind the lean-to, tucked into the trees, Harlan found old boot prints, 2 different sizes. One small, one large. The tracks were faint, nearly covered by snow, but they headed north toward the canyon wall. "Grab your coat," he said. "We're going." The canyon narrowed quickly, the rocks pressing in like jaws. A creek trickled somewhere beneath the frost. Harlan led, holding Delia close behind him, every sense alert. The silence here was different, deeper, heavier, like the earth was holding its breath. And then they heard it. A cough. Small, raspy. Delia grabbed Harlan's coat. That was her. He raised a hand for silence. Another cough. Louder now. Then a voice, hoarse, high, panicked. "Stop, please, don't!" They moved fast. Around the bend in a hollow cut beneath the stone stood a man in a tattered coat and wide-brimmed hat. His back was to them. In front of him, cowering against the canyon wall, was a tiny girl wrapped in what looked like a flour sack. She was shivering, arms up to shield her face. "Let the girl go," Harlan barked. The man spun, startled, pulling a small knife from his belt. "Ain't your business, mister." "It is now," Harlan said, stepping forward. Delia moved to the side, placing herself in Ellie's line of sight. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're okay now." The man's eyes darted from Harlan to Delia to Ellie, calculating. "You take one more step, I'll gut you," he snapped. Harlan didn't flinch. "You touch either of them, I'll put you in the ground." For a long second, the only sound was the wind scraping through stone. Then the man turned and ran. Harlan didn't chase. Instead, he knelt beside Ellie, whose chest heaved in gasps. "You're safe," he said. "He's gone." Ellie blinked up at him, lips cracked, eyes swollen. "My mama said I'd be okay if I was brave. You were braver than most grown men." Delia dropped to her knees and took Ellie's hand. "Come with us. We got food. We got warmth. We got someone who don't give up on people." Ellie looked at her confused. Who Delia smiled. Him. They carried her back wrapped in Harlan's coat. She was light as a whisper. Harlan cradled her like she was made of porcelain, and Delia walked beside him, holding the wooden horse in her coat pocket tight. At the shack, Harlan lit the fire, gave Ellie warm broth, and wrapped her in wool blankets. Her body trembled from more than cold, but her eyes followed them now, not darting away like prey. Delia fed her spoonfuls until Ellie leaned against her, worn out but calm. "I didn't think nobody'd come," Ellie murmured. "I didn't either," Delia whispered. "But he came for me. Now we came for you." Later, after Ellie had fallen asleep on a bed of hay and blankets, Delia sat beside Harlan near the fire. "She could have died," she said. "But she didn't." Delia stared into the flames. "If we hadn't come when we did." "You saved her, Delia. You saw the flyer. You didn't let it go." She shook her head. "No. We saved her." He looked down at her. You feel different now, Delia nodded. I don't feel broken anymore. He swallowed. Neither do I. The fire hissed and crackled. Outside, the wind had died. The woods felt watchful but calm, like they'd borne witness to something sacred. Delia reached into her pocket and pulled out the horse. She handed it to Harlan. Make one for her too, she asked. He took the toy gently. Course I will. And in that quiet warmth, as Ellie dreamed safe dreams for the first time in who knows how long, and Delia leaned against Harlan's arm without fear, something unspoken bound them tighter than blood. I didn't think nobody'd come. I didn't either. But he came for me. Now we came for you. She don't talk like other kids. Like she's scared to take up space, like she's waiting to be punished just for breathing. May sat on the front porch swing holding Junie's tiny palm against her chest, where her heart beat slow and steady. The girl's fingers, like bird bones, didn't curl around May's dress or even twitch. She just sat staring ahead at the dry cotton fields shimmering under the midday sun. Did she say anything today? Holt asked as he leaned against the porch post, arms crossed over his chest. May shook her head slowly. She barely eats, won't speak unless you're looking away. But she flinches every time she hears the screen door. Holt exhaled hard through his nose, his eyes narrowing. That's not just shyness. That's damage. From inside the house, footsteps shuffled across the floor, small, careful, like someone trying not to be heard. Holt turned toward the door and Junie tensed so hard that May felt it through her spine. She pulled the girl a little closer. That's just Trudy setting the table, May said quietly. She's trying to help, I know. Holt's jaw clenched. I just hate that Junie don't know that yet. Trudy, his 11-year-old niece, had been visiting for the summer. Bright, full of words and questions, she'd tried 3 times to get Junie to play dolls with her. Each time, Junie had frozen like a rabbit caught in the open. After dinner that night, Trudy cornered Holt by the barn, her tone small but firm. Uncle Holt, she began scuffing the toe of her boot against the dirt. I don't think she likes me. She doesn't know you yet, Baby Holt said, gently resting a calloused hand on her shoulder. She don't know any of us. She's scared of everything, Trudy said, her voice cracking. She won't even look at me when I smile at her. Holt squatted down until his eyes were level with hers. She's been through things we don't understand. I don't think anyone's ever smiled at her without wanting something in return. Trudy's eyes filled. I just want to be her friend. I know. And that's more than most adults ever give. Inside, Junie sat cross-legged in the corner of her room, silently watching the light crawl up the wall. The yellow-painted wooden walls of the house felt foreign to her, too clean, too warm, too full of sounds that weren't angry. She didn't know how to be here in this quiet. Every noise made her wait for yelling. Every kindness made her flinch. The next day, May came in with a folded blanket and a small plush bunny she'd found in the attic trunk. It's old but soft. She offered, crouching to Junie's eye level. Used to belong to Holt's sister when she was little. Junie didn't move. Her eyes flicked to the bunny, then back to the floor. May didn't push. She simply set it beside the girl and left. Later that night, Holt passed by the doorway and saw Junie asleep. Her hand curled around the bunny's torn ear. At breakfast the following morning, something shifted. Trudy had left her napkin folded into a swan like she always did when she was bored. Junie stared at it for a long time, then slowly reached out and touched the tip of the swan's beak with one finger. Trudy held her breath. Junie didn't say anything, but when Trudy got up from the table, she left another napkin and winked. Junie didn't smile, but her eyes didn't look away either. It was a start. That afternoon, Holt saddled up Patch the old gelding who used to be the gentlest ride in the county and led him toward the paddock. Junie stood by the fence hands, gripping the top rail, her eyes following every step the horse took. "You like horses?" Holt asked, careful not to sound too eager. Junie gave the smallest nod. "He don't run fast anymore," he said. "Not since he pulled up lame last winter, but he's steady as a Sunday preacher." Junie's lips twitched, just barely, but it was there. "You want to sit on him?" Junie shrank a little, shoulders, drawing tight, eyes darting between the horse and Holt. "I won't let go," he promised. "May'll be right here, too. And Patch, he's more likely to fall asleep standin' than buck." For a moment, the wind carried nothing but the distant hum of cicadas and the soft breath of the old gelding. Then silently, Junie stepped forward. May lifted her gently into the saddle, Holt steadying the reins. Junie sat stiff as a fence post, but she didn't cry. She didn't try to climb down either. Patch took 2 slow steps. Junie's fingers gripped the horn of the saddle like it was life itself, but her eyes widened. And for the first time since Holt found her, she spoke. "Big." May blinked. "What's that, honey?" Junie swallowed. "The horse. He's big." A pause. Then Holt smiled, not wide, but full of something warm and deep. "Sure is." That evening, the porch was quiet again. Junie sat curled on a blanket beside Trudy, who was showing her how to twist yarn into little animals. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was gentle. May sat rocking slowly, her eyes on the pair. "She don't talk like other kids," she said to Holt, who was whittling nearby. "Like she's scared to take up space, like she's waiting to be punished just for breathing." Holt didn't look up. "I know the feeling." May turned to him. "Did you—" He ran his thumb over the edge of the wood. "When I came back from the war. Felt like I had to earn every breath, too. Took a long time to believe I deserved peace." May nodded slowly, her eyes back on the children. "Maybe she'll believe it faster than you did." Junie glanced up at that moment, catching May's gaze, and didn't look away. Later that night, when Holt stepped out to check the barn doors, he found Junie standing by the porch swing, her arms wrapped around that old bunny. She didn't run when he walked toward her. She didn't speak, but when he sat down beside her, she leaned ever so slightly into his side. He looked down at her, heart tugging. "Tomorrow," he said gently, "we're going to go into town, get you a pair of boots that fit." Junie blinked. "I reckon you're staying for a while?" Her head tilted, uncertain. "I hope that's all right with you." She nodded once, then very quietly. "Okay." But in town, not everyone would welcome the idea of a child with no name, no blood ties, and a past that didn't belong to polite conversation. Holt's promise would be tested soon, and Junie's place among them would need more than quiet kindness to hold. "I'd rather live in silence than listen to another lie." The silence between Emery and me had stretched out for days, wide and cold, like the canyon behind the barn. At breakfast, he barely looked at me. At supper, he didn't join us at all. Even Nora's gentle nudging couldn't thaw the frost gathering between us. He'd stopped asking if I needed anything. He stopped knocking on my door. His boots still hit the porch at dawn, but they passed right by mine. I didn't know which truth cut him deeper, that I had been married before or that I hadn't told him. It wasn't supposed to matter. My past was behind me, stitched shut, buried under quiet years. But now somehow, it felt as raw as the day I'd walked away from it. I swept the cabin floor for the 3rd time that morning, though it didn't need it. The rhythm of the broom was the only thing keeping my hands from shaking. I kept seeing the look in his eyes that night he stormed out, not fury, not betrayal, but something worse. Disappointment. The door creaked open. Nora stepped inside, cheeks flushed from the cold. "You've barely touched your food in 2 days," she said gently. "And neither has he. I can't force him to speak to me." "Maybe not. But maybe he's just waiting for you to show him you still want to be spoken to." I sighed, leaning the broom against the wall. "He said he needed time. Time doesn't mend what silence breaks." Her eyes softened. "Do you regret telling him no?" "I regret not telling him sooner." I stared out the window. The pasture looked brittle, the wind laying the grass flat. I just thought, maybe I didn't need to be defined by it anymore. "You aren't," she said. "But secrets give folks room to imagine the worst. And sometimes the worst is easier to believe than the truth." I let her words sit with me. She was right, of course. But knowing that didn't make this feel any easier. I finally left the cabin late that afternoon. Emery had taken the horses out earlier, and by now the sun was dipping low. I walked toward the barn anyway, unsure what I was looking for. Maybe I just wanted to see something he'd touched. Something he still cared for, since it clearly wasn't me. But when I stepped inside, the barn was empty. Except for one small, trembling sound. I turned toward the far stall and saw Finn standing there, tears streaking his dirt-smudged face. "Sweetheart, what are you doing in here?" I hurried over and knelt beside him. He hiccuped. "Papa's mad." He yelled at the wall again. I tried to talk to him, but he told me to go feed the goats. I don't like it when he's quiet like this. I pulled him into my arms. "He's just hurting Honey. Grown-ups don't always know how to show it." "Did you hurt him?" His voice was small, muffled against my shoulder. "Yes," I whispered, pressing a kiss to his hair. "But not because I wanted to." He sniffled. "Maybe you can fix it. Maybe I can try." That night I couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up, rattling the shutters like old bones. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and lit a lamp, walking down the hallway toward the room at the end. His room. I stood at the door for a long time, heart pounding. Then I knocked softly twice. No answer. I turned the knob. He was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, in his long-sleeved shirt, staring at the dark window. I stepped inside, holding the lamp low. "I won't stay long," I said. I wanted to tell you what you deserve to hear." His eyes didn't move from the window. I wasn't trying to hide my past because I'm ashamed of it. I continued. "I didn't tell you because for the first time in my life, it didn't define me. I didn't want it to touch this place. Or touch you." His jaw flexed, but still he didn't speak. I took a breath. I was married at 17 to a man my mother chose. He wasn't cruel, just cold. Like a stone you hold in your hand for too long, hoping it'll warm. But it never does. When he died, I didn't cry. And I didn't look back. I just walked forward. And I never thought I'd have to explain it to anyone because no one ever asked to know me after. He turned, then slowly, his voice rough. "Why wouldn't you think I'd want to know? Because no one ever did." That landed heavier than I expected. He stood up, moving closer, but not touching me. "I spent weeks thinking I was building something honest with you," he said, low and tight. "That everything between us was straight as the fence lines I lay. Then to find out I only had half the truth." "You didn't have half," I whispered. "You had everything that mattered." "Then why did it feel like a lie?" I looked up at him. "Because sometimes silence is the loudest kind of lie, and I'm sorry for letting it grow between us." He searched my face and for a long while said nothing. Then he stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to move past this yet," he admitted. "But I don't want you gone." I nodded, holding his gaze. "Then I'll stay, and I'll keep showing up until you know I'm still here for the right reasons." "I never doubted your reasons." His voice softened. I just don't want to be a replacement. For anyone. You aren't. My voice cracked. You never were. He looked at me for a long moment more before he finally nodded. Go get some sleep. I turned, stepping back into the hallway, heart thudding in my chest. Behind me, the door didn't close. The next morning, Finn was sitting between us at breakfast, chattering about the creek and the frogs he'd seen. Emery listened, nodding absently, and passed me the biscuits without a word. But he didn't pull his hand away when our fingers brushed. Later that day, I saw him talking to Nora by the barn. She glanced at me over his shoulder, eyes narrowing slightly. Whatever they were saying, it was about me. I watched them from the porch, my stomach tightening. When she walked back toward the house, she didn't meet my gaze, just brushed past me and said under her breath, "He deserves truth. All of it." My breath caught. Something about the way she said it, I turned to call after her, but the wind rose again, swallowing my voice in its cold hands. The snow had settled thick overnight, cloaking the land in silence. Cedar Creek Ranch lay under a soft white hush, its fences barely visible under the drift. Clara stood at the barn door, brushing flakes off her coat, her breath curling in front of her face like ghost trails. She'd woken before dawn, unable to sleep, haunted by the words she'd overheard how Colton's family still planned to send him away. She thought of all the quiet progress Colton had made learning to hold a pen without shaking, how he smiled a little more each morning, the way he no longer flinched at the sound of boots approaching. The ranch had become a sanctuary for him, a home carved out of gentleness and small victories. And now it was all threatened by a decision made behind his back. Daisy appeared behind her with a wool blanket in her arms. "Thought he might want this," she said softly, her cheeks pink from the cold. "He didn't eat breakfast." Clara nodded. "He's barely spoken since last night. I think he feels betrayed." Daisy frowned. "He has every right. They didn't even ask what he wanted." Inside the barn, the smell of hay and horses was warm and grounding. Colton sat on a hay bale near the back, his coat dusted with straw. His gaze was far off, lost somewhere deep and unreachable. He didn't look up when they stepped in. Clara crouched beside him and gently offered the blanket. "You cold?" He shook his head, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not a burden, Clara. I know that," she said. "But I need you to know it too." He looked at her, then eyes red-rimmed and glassy. "They think I'll never be useful again, like they're ashamed of me. But this place is the only one where I ever felt human again." Clara's throat tightened. "You are human. You're not broken, Colton. You've been surviving something nobody should have to. That's not weakness. That's strength." His jaw worked, but no words came. She continued gently. "I want you here. We all do. But it can't just be me fighting for you. You have to speak for yourself now." His eyes lowered. "What if they don't listen? Then we make them." Her voice was steady, full of conviction. "We stand together. You're not alone anymore." This place made me feel like I could stay, like maybe I wasn't too far gone after all. The words slipped from him like a confession, like a dam quietly giving way. "I don't want to leave, Clara." "Then don't," she said simply. "We'll find a way." That afternoon, Clara called a meeting in the main house. Seth, the ranch hands, Daisy, even June from the bakery down the road. They all gathered in the parlor boots, shaking off snow and eyes heavy with concern. Colton sat beside her, still silent but present. It was the first time he'd stood before a crowd since the war. Clara stood her shoulders square. "I need you all to hear this because it matters. Colton has been through hell. And he's healing here with us. But someone out east still thinks he needs to be put away, like he's some shameful secret to be hidden. We know better. Murmurs rippled through the room. Seth folded his arms and nodded a quiet gesture of support. Clara continued, "This ranch isn't just land. It's a place for second chances, and we don't throw people away when they need us most." June spoke up. "I've seen him work. Quiet, steady. He fixed my wagon wheel last week like it was nothing." Daisy chimed in. "He taught Ellie how to braid a lead rope." You should have seen her face. Colton shifted in his chair, his fingers curling on his knee. For the first time, the voices around him weren't shouting or accusing. They were speaking for him, lifting him. Seth stepped forward. "If anyone's got a problem with him being here, they can take it up with me. I run this ranch and I say he stays." Clara glanced at Colton, whose eyes brimmed but didn't spill. She didn't press him to speak. His presence was already his loudest statement. The meeting closed with a quiet unity. No dramatic declarations, no raised voices, just an understanding that something sacred had been affirmed. Colton wasn't leaving. Not now. Not ever. Later, under the stars, Clara found him sitting by the paddock fence, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "You did it," she said softly. He chuckled, bitter and small. "I didn't say a word. You didn't have to. They spoke for you. But tomorrow I want you to try." He nodded slowly. "I want to learn to write letters again, to speak with my own words." Her smile broke open like morning sun. "Then we'll start tomorrow." The wind stirred the trees, and in the stillness, Colton said, "You know, it used to feel like I was watching my life from behind glass, like it was happening to someone else." Clara didn't interrupt. "But today..." He looked up. "Today I felt like I stepped back in." She sat beside him and leaned her head on his shoulder. No words were needed. A flicker of candlelight glowed in the house windows behind them. It was not just shelter, it was home. The kind of place that taught a man how to breathe again. And Colton was finally breathing. I wasn't afraid to face the fire. I was afraid no one would believe I'd already walked through it. The courthouse door groaned as I pushed it open. I had walked through plenty of doors in my life, school doors, church doors, hospital doors, but never one that felt as heavy as this. Like it knew the weight of what I was about to do. Like it wanted to warn me. My boots echoed against the polished tile, every step announcing that I no longer lived in the shadows of shame or silence. I was here to speak. Cassidy had offered to drive me, but I told her I needed to walk in alone. My hands didn't shake like I thought they might. Instead, they clenched the folder I carried, pages of documents, receipts, letters, photos, proof, not just of what they did, but of who I had been trying to be all along. The truth didn't need to shout. It only needed to be told, one quiet word at a time. Miss Langston, a bailiff, called out, nodding toward the open courtroom. I stepped forward. Inside, the room was smaller than I expected. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, catching dust in the air like gold flecks frozen in time. At the front, Judge Holbrook sat with a lined face and steady eyes. He'd seen a lifetime of stories unravel in this room. I just had to make sure mine didn't get lost among them. On the right sat my father and his attorney, Mr. Wexler, a man with hair too neat and a mouth that always seemed to curve into something smug. My father didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight, arms crossed like he still had power here. Beside him, Lainey sat with her hands folded, prim and perfect. She wore one of Mother's old brooches. I knew that pin. It used to belong to me. The moment I took my place, the hush in the room settled like fog on a lake. The judge gestured for my attorney, Miriam DeWitt, to begin. Miriam stood crisp and calm. Your Honor, we're here today to contest the unlawful transfer of assets belonging to Miss Langston, taken without her consent and under emotional coercion. Wexler scoffed. Your Honor, we've been over this. Judge Holbrook held up a hand. You'll get your turn, Mr. Wexler. I watched them all from my seat, heart thudding not with fear, but resolve. They thought this was about money. It wasn't. It never had been. It was about being erased slowly, subtly, until there was nothing left of you but the space where your name used to be. Miriam handed over the papers. These are bank records showing transfers from Miss Langston's account to Mr. Langston's over the course of 8 years. She was told they were for family support, only to discover later that the funds were rerouted into trusts and properties not bearing her name. Judge Holbrook flipped through the documents, brows furrowing. Wexler rose. Miss Langston has always been part of a generous family arrangement. There was no deception, merely a misunderstanding of financial agreements between kin. Kin doesn't erase kin, I said quietly. My voice rang louder than I expected. Not unless they were never planning to keep them in the picture. All heads turned. Even my father glanced at me then, like hearing me speak surprised him. Like he forgot I had a voice at all. I gave because I loved them. I gave because they said they needed me. But it was never enough, was it? My words spilled from somewhere deeper than my throat. You told me I was part of this family, but you spent years cutting me out of it. Judge Holbrook watched me with something like patience, maybe curiosity. I breathed in. I built something on my own. No one taught me. No one handed it to me. And when I came back to share that success, you treated me like a threat. Like I'd stolen something you were entitled to. I turned toward Lainey. You looked me in the eye and told people I was just the servant. But I was the only one keeping the lights on. Lainey's eyes narrowed, lips tightening. You didn't just take money. You took meaning. You tried to take my identity. I held up one of the old ledgers. This was Mother's handwriting. You erased it and replaced her will with something she never would have signed. A murmur ran through the gallery. Wexler stood quickly, trying to object, but Judge Holbrook held up a hand again. We'll take a brief recess, he said. 10 minutes. In the hallway outside, I leaned against the cool wall. My breath shook in my lungs. Cassidy approached quietly with a bottle of water. You did it, she said. I nodded. Almost. Even if the judge doesn't rule in your favor, you said what needed to be said. I didn't come here to win a ruling, I whispered. I came here to reclaim the part of me they thought they could silence. When we returned, the judge's voice was steady, unhurried. Based on the evidence submitted and the testimony given, I find sufficient cause to proceed to a formal hearing regarding the legitimacy of the asset transfers and contested documents. Lainey stiffened. Wexler whispered something sharp into my father's ear. He didn't move, just stared at the floor like the ground itself had betrayed him. I felt no joy, no triumph, only the deep, slow release of something that had been bound too long inside me. Like air returning after you've held your breath for years. Outside the courthouse, the wind had picked up. Leaves scattered along the sidewalk, chasing each other like restless truths finally let loose. I looked toward the parking lot and saw Miriam walking beside Cassidy, talking quietly. I stayed still, soaking in the silence. For once, no one was pulling me back inside. No one was telling me I had to fix what they broke. I had walked through fire and made it here not unburned, but alive. And I still had more to say. I turned toward the courthouse steps again. My story wasn't finished. I wasn't afraid to face the fire. I was afraid no one would believe I'd already walked through it. The sun was already low by the time we reached the hill overlooking the burned remnants of the cabin. Smoke no longer rose from the rubble, but the scorched beams jutted out of the earth like broken ribs. Levi had been silent most of the ride, his hands clenched around the reins, eyes locked on a future none of us could yet name. I dismounted first boots hitting the dry earth with a thud. Abby slid down beside me, her small hand instinctively grabbing mine, but it was Levi who walked forward slowly, like each step was breaking him further open. He stopped just shy of the wreckage and lowered himself to one knee. He didn't cry. He didn't curse. He just stared. "I lost everything before I knew how much it meant," he said quietly, voice like a wind through charred wood. Abby let go of my hand and walked over to him, slipping her little fingers into his calloused ones. He looked down at her, and I saw it then, how far he'd come from the man who once locked himself away in guilt and fear, the kind of man who thought he had nothing left to offer even to himself. "She would have wanted us to build again," Abby whispered her words, too old for her age. Levi closed his eyes. "I know." I knelt beside them, laying a hand on his shoulder. "We don't have to do it alone." He nodded slowly, and when he stood, he did it taller than I'd ever seen him. The ranchers from surrounding properties had come in the past few days, offering shelter tools a bit of feed. Nobody talked about why they showed up, they just did. That was how these hills worked. They saw your shame and pain and gave you back dignity in the form of hammer swings and shared coffee. The next day, we started clearing the debris. Even Miles came, his arm still stiff from the altercation that nearly got him shot. He worked hard quietly and never once asked for a place at the table again. He seemed to understand now that respect wasn't a thing you demanded. It was something you earned. By the week's end, the foundation was cleared and new lumber lined the old wagon Levi had once used to haul stones from the creek bed. Every board placed felt like healing layered between nails. In the evenings, we sat on the ridge under stars, passing a tin cup of weak coffee and stronger stories. Abby had taken to curling up with a scrap of quilt someone from the church brought over. And Levi, he'd begun sketching plans on the back of old feed bags. "I want it bigger this time," he told me, drawing a wide rectangle with an X through it. "Space for guests, for healing, for family," I said. He looked up at me, the light of the fire catching the edges of a smile. "Yeah, for family." The barn was rebuilt first. Livestock needed shelter, and though we didn't have many animals left, what remained had to be protected. Thomas, the older ranch hand who'd once kept to himself, started showing up at dawn with bags of grain and wordless offers of help. He was one of those men whose past hung around him like a scent whiskey and regret. But that week, something shifted. I caught him one morning, smoothing Abby's hair while she fed the goats, and he whispered, "Looks like someone finally found her place." I carried those words with me for days. Then one evening, a package arrived. Levi was the one who found it, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a string. No note, no sender. Just initials carved into the wooden box inside AJ. He opened it on the porch, and we stood in stunned silence as he lifted out the contents. A photograph of Amanda, one we'd never seen before, holding Abby as a baby, eyes soft, proud, so full of life it made your chest ache. Underneath it, there was a deed. A deed to the parcel of land that had once been stolen from Levi's great-grandfather generations ago. "Someone's making things right," Levi murmured, but I saw it in his eyes. He didn't care about the land. Not really. What mattered was the memory, the acknowledgement, the fact that someone remembered Amanda and chose to honor her. Abby leaned into me. "Mama always said God doesn't forget anything." Levi set the photo down on the step like it was sacred. Then maybe he finally remembered us. Those words lingered long after the stars took the sky. The house rose slowly. A neighbor brought over extra hands, 3 young boys, who worked hard and spoke little. One had a limp. Another bore the same quiet expression Levi once wore. And yet under the hammer and saw they came alive. It was as if they were building more than just someone else's home. They were building a place where none of us had to be what we used to be. We held a small gathering once the frame was done, just to fire a few sandwiches and the sound of boots shifting in the dirt. Levi stood up that night and said something I won't forget. "Not one of us gets through without falling," he said, holding Abby's hand. "But if someone reaches down and helps you up, then it ain't failure. It's grace." And then he added, turning toward me, "When you have a place to return to, you never truly lose your way." That was the quote he'd carved into the beam above the doorframe the next day. It stayed with me as we fitted windows, laid flooring, painted walls with colors Abby picked: soft, butter yellow, and river stone gray. It stayed with me as I watched Levi step back and nod, not at the building, but at the life breathing inside it again. We were almost whole. Almost. But healing is never quiet all the way through. There are always tremors beneath the surface, the kind you don't see coming. And though the house stood strong, not all the wounds we carried had finished bleeding. One morning, as mist hung low across the hills, I found a letter tucked into the gatepost. No return address, no name. Inside was a single sentence. "You think redemption erases history," and beneath it a pressed lily, dried, fragile, and white. I stared at it for a long time, because I knew without a doubt it wasn't meant for me. It was meant for Levi, and whoever sent it wasn't finished. Not yet. The house was silent. Too silent for mourning. Ruth turned the corner from the hallway, tightening her robe against the chill and the tightness that had returned to her chest. She found silence not just in the room, but in her son's absence. Cody's backpack was missing. So were his boots. The door hadn't creaked. She would have heard it. Always did. "Cody?" She called, her voice uncertain in the stillness. "Baby?" No answer. She checked the kitchen. Nothing. She glanced out the window. No tracks in the frost-laced ground. The sun was just beginning to cast weak light through the pines. "Liam," she said more sharply now, turning toward his room. But Liam's bed was still made. He wasn't home either. Her stomach dropped. Something was wrong. She grabbed her coat off the hook, shoved her feet into boots, and was out the door, calling again. Cody only. The trees answered, shivering in the cold wind. She spotted Phoebe stepping out of her cabin with her braids still damp from the early wash. "Phoebe, have you seen Cody or Liam?" Phoebe's eyes widened. No, I haven't." Ruth's voice cracked. "His things are gone, and so is Liam." Phoebe looked past her toward the barn trail. Wait. Together they followed the faint line of boot prints in the dew. As they rounded the curve where the ranch road split, Ruth saw the distant glint of horses, saddled riders moving away from the property, 2 of them. Cody turned slightly in the saddle. It was him. "Cody," she screamed, voice splitting the morning. The boy froze. Liam stopped beside him. They didn't turn back. Ruth started running. "Cody, you come back here this minute." But the horses picked up speed and the boy didn't look again. Phoebe caught up and caught Ruth by the arm. "Wait, look! They're heading east, toward the mesa." "What the hell is Liam doing?" Ruth cried. "He knows Cody's just a kid. He knows he needs." She couldn't finish. "Should I saddle a horse?" Phoebe asked. Ruth shook her head. Her hands were trembling. "No. I know where they're going. There's only one reason Liam would head that way with Cody at dawn." Phoebe stared. "The Basin Trail." Ruth nodded slowly. She returned to the house with a storm brewing in her chest and rage bleeding at the edges of her vision. The moment she stepped inside, she walked to the drawer Liam never thought she noticed. The tin box. The one he kept the old photographs and the deed papers in. And behind them, folded 3 times into a square, a letter Cody would never know about unless someone put it in his hand. Ruth read it again. Liam had signed Cody up for some ranch apprenticeship 3 states over. He had been arranging it quietly, without telling her, without asking, as if he still had the right to direct their lives. Cody hadn't decided to leave. Liam had taken him. Ruth pressed her palm to her forehead, her breathing short and hot. She dropped the letter onto the table and turned to Phoebe. "I'm going after them." Phoebe looked startled. "Alone, I don't need backup. I need my son. But the trail's long dangerous this time of year. You won't make it before nightfall. I don't care." Phoebe put a firm hand on her shoulder. "You will. Because Cody's not going to understand why you came if you ride off and fall off a cliff in a blizzard." Ruth blinked. "Then what do I do, Phoebe? Sit here? Watch him ride away like I don't exist?" "No," Phoebe said calmly. "You call Sheriff Boyd. I'm not sending cops after my boy. You're not. You're sending them after a man who took a child out of state without his mother's consent. That's not parenting. That's kidnapping." The word cracked like a whip. Ruth closed her eyes. She hated it. But Phoebe was right. 10 minutes later, she stood on the porch as a tan truck kicked up dust from the county road. Sheriff Boyd climbed out, jaw-clenched, eyes knowing. "Just tell me where they went," he said. Ruth handed him the map Liam had marked in red pen 2 weeks ago. "Cody doesn't even know he's being taken. I'm sure of it. He wouldn't leave me not like this." Boyd nodded. "We'll find him." Ruth stood there long after the truck rolled away. The house felt colder, quieter, emptier than it ever had. That night, rain pounded against the roof as if the sky itself was punishing the earth. Ruth sat by the fire, staring at the faint embers rocking slowly, her hands clenched in her lap. Her baby was out there, maybe frightened, maybe confused, maybe convinced he'd done something brave. But she knew better. And that's when she saw it lying forgotten by the fireplace. Cody's drawing pad, the one he carried everywhere. She picked it up, flipped past the doodles of horses and mountains and the little tree house they'd never finished building. Then she saw the last page, a drawing of her. Standing alone at the edge of the barn, smiling but with tears in her eyes. In the corner, in a child's shaky hand, were words, "I don't want to leave Mama. But Liam says I have to be a man." The quote came back to her, unbidden and bitter. He tricked Cody with big promises, but that boy already had everything he needed here. A mama who'd never give up on him. Ruth's body sank into the chair, shaking. She didn't sob, not loudly. The sounds came quiet and broken like the tearing of old cloth. It wasn't just about Liam taking Cody. It was about a lie wrapped in the disguise of manhood, and a boy who still believed he had to choose. She stared at the fire as the wind howled through the chimney. Then her eyes narrowed. She would not wait. She would not be the woman who folded into grief and watched her child vanish into a man's shadow. She would find Cody, and this time she wouldn't just bring him home. She'd show him who he really was, not who Liam wanted him to be. The educational lesson learned from this story is that even when we feel cast aside or forgotten, love and redemption can find us in the most unexpected ways. Life doesn't always unfold in a straight line, but when we lead with kindness, courage, and quiet resolve, we often end up where we were meant to be all along. It's never too late to start again or to become someone else's safe harbor. Sometimes the broken places in our lives are where the light gets in.